The reason I chose the subject I chose to write on for Underdogs and Outsiders can actually be found on the dedication page. When you open up to that first page, you'll see that I dedicated my very first book to my mom. And I said, in hopes that all of your pain can find redemption. Advent is a season where our longing, our grief, our hope for redemption is at full tilt. That all of our pain comes to the forefront, that all of our grief comes to the surface. And so, as I sat down to write the book and think about what I wanted to write about, I wanted to write about stories that maybe sort of began in the darkness and moved on to redemption. Stories for which maybe the situations themselves looked like they were hopeless, but they ended up giving us the greatest hope that the world had ever seen. My hope was that in our stories, the stories that we each grow up with, our own grief and pain, but also in my particular story, in seeing my mom's story of abuse, of seeing my mom's story of struggling day in and day out for her entire life, of seeing my mom's story of being sick, of seeing my mom die. I wanted to write about stories that acknowledge the fullness of the darkness that is life, but then didn't just leave us there, that moved on to hope and redemption and purpose. So I chose the women in the genealogy of Jesus, because in these stories, you have women who are used, you have women who are abused, you have women who know the fullness of living in darkness. You know women who are taken advantage of. They're seen in these stories, and yet none of their stories ends in that place. Some of their stories don't find full redemption until Jesus, and so it's generations later, they never see the fruit of their struggle, the fruit of their character and their righteousness. But each of them, in the midst of their own darkness, they try to live faithfully. You have Ruth, who is a Moabitess, and she is a foreigner to the people of Israel. She has no status, no privilege within Israel, and yet she works hard and she makes the most of her opportunity to take care of a mother-in-law that she technically has no obligations for. You have somebody like Tamar, who manages to take all the abuse she has suffered and all the neglect she has suffered, and she figures out this really strange and in some ways offensive way to be righteous. You have Rahab, who is the woman who would be the ultimate outcast. Somebody that Joshua and his army was actually told to kill and slaughter and leave no one alive, and yet she makes the single greatest confession of faith in the entire book of Joshua. The women in the genealogy of Jesus, they are stories of hope and redemption. They are stories that acknowledge the fullness of our pain and grief, and yet show the ultimate redemptive purposes of God. And it is my hope that in those stories, that generations later, after my mom's pain is forgotten and long over, it is my hope that her story will find redemption. That Christ will reveal himself as the one who brings together all of our pain and all of our stories and weaves them into this tapestry of love that he then heals. I wrote this book for that reason, and it is my hope that the people who read this book would be able to see that same tapestry of love and that same story of redemption lived out in their lives, no matter how dark things seem right now.